If a man is removed from his first-class seat simply because of his skin color, could an entire corporation collapse after just one phone call? They did not ask. They did not verify. They simply saw a black man sitting in first class and immediately ordered him to leave, as if his very presence was a mistake that needed correcting. No explanation, no look of empathy, just a cold directive spoken in front of dozens of other passengers. This seat is reserved for someone more important. That was how they said it, as if the price of the ticket meant nothing, as if the only thing that truly mattered, his skin color, had already determined his worth. What they didn't know was that this single decision would cost the airline $500 million in under an hour. But at that moment, all they saw was an unfamiliar name on a boarding pass. Jamal Rivers, short, unremarkable, evoking no sense of power or prestige. No one could have guessed that the man they dismissed was actually the undercover CEO of Valmora Capital, the very firm that had acquired over 51% of the airline's shares just 2 days prior. That morning, Jamal arrived at JFK with an appearance that couldn't have been more ordinary. Deep blue suit without a tie, modest leather shoes, and a worn black briefcase in hand. No assistant, no security. Nothing to suggest he held the power to reshape the fate of the entire industry. He didn't need it. He walked with the quiet assurance of someone who never needed to make noise to be noticed. And it was precisely that calm that unsettled those who held only half measures of authority. When Jamal scanned his boarding pass and made his way to first class, the flight attendant barely glanced at his ticket before waving him through, as if not entirely convinced it was real. But his patience was tested the moment he arrived at seat 1A, the seat he had reserved in advance. A white man, reeking of entitlement, was already seated there, swirling a glass of champagne like the chair had been his birthright. Jamal did not rush. He looked down at his boarding pass, then turned to the flight attendant and calmly asked, "I believe this is my seat." The flight attendant, her name was Sasha, did not bother checking. She simply offered a rehearsed smile and lowered her voice politely. "I'm sorry, sir. There's been a last-minute change in the seating arrangement. We appreciate your cooperation, so we can depart on time." But Jamal did not move. And in that moment of silence, a storm began to gather, quietly, yet irresistibly. The atmosphere inside the first-class cabin radiated a quiet elegance, where every sound was soft and every gesture polished. But when Jamal remained standing before his assigned seat, he ceased to be a passenger. He became a problem. Sasha, the blonde flight attendant with a well-rehearsed smile, offered no apology and made no attempt to check the system. She simply gestured for him to step back, speaking as someone reminding another of where they belong. A diamond-level frequent flyer just requested this seat. I hope you understand. Jamal tilted his head slightly, and his gaze shifted from inquisitive to analytical. "And my new seat will be," Sasha pointed down the aisle, "7C, business class. Still luxurious, still expensive, but no longer the front row, no longer visible." Jamal exhaled softly, like wind passing over glass, but his eyes began to harden. "Who made the request?" he asked. A beat of silence, then Sasha replied, "Mr. Gavin Locke." The name was not unfamiliar. Gavin was a loud investor, known for his contrarian takes. He had once dismissed diversity hiring campaigns as ethical marketing stunts. Jamal recalled a leaked video from 2 years earlier where Gavin smugly declared that class is inherited, not earned. Now that very man sat in seat 1A, legs crossed, smirking at his phone screen, seemingly detached from the world around him. Sasha did not take her eyes off Jamal. her voice softening but not altering in tone. "It's really not worth the trouble, sir. 7C is still an excellent seat." She didn't need to say it plainly, because everything was encoded. In her expression, her tone, in that unspoken language only those who have been questioned truly understand. Jamal didn't argue. He knew that in moments like these, any protest could be twisted into disruption. But before turning away, he asked one question, gently, without accusation, more like a litmus test. "You never asked my name. You never looked at my ticket." Sasha flinched slightly, but maintained her faint professional smile, a kind of mask honed by repetition. "We were informed by upper management," she replied. Jamal nodded, not out of belief, but because he had just confirmed something important. This wasn't a personal mistake. This was a mechanism. Jamal walked toward seat 7C, like a man who accepts, but never submits. Since childhood, his mother had taught him that silence can be the most dangerous weapon, and now he carried it like a blade sheathed in velvet. As he settled into the business class seat, just behind the curtain divider, the murmurs began to stir. A middle-aged man in 8B leaned over and whispered to his wife. "Probably bought a discounted ticket. Doesn't look like the first-class type." The words weren't whispered at all and seemed designed to drift like toxic smoke, thin enough to dodge blame, heavy enough to wound. Jamal heard every syllable. Not a single one missed. At that moment, Evan, a young flight attendant new to the job, still wearing the softness of inexperience, approached, his eyes landing on Jamal with a visible pang of sympathy. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but Sasha appeared just behind him and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. A small touch, not painful but chilling. "Just observe," she whispered, and Evan understood, not through her words, but through the rigid tension locking his entire body. He nodded slightly, stepped back, and remained silent, like everyone else. In first class, Gavin Locke raised his champagne glass and clinked it with a woman seated beside him. "I don't care how much he paid," Gavin sneered. "Some people ruin the atmosphere just by being near." Those words dropped like stones on still water, sending out silent ripples no one dared confront. Not a single passenger reacted. No one turned around. A white woman in 4A frowned but quickly looked away, her eyes avoiding the truth. Sasha stood nearby, tablet in hand, though her eyes were fixed on a private message, a cold instruction from the flight manager. "Maintain first-class integrity. No mixing guests." Her throat tightened, but she said nothing. Meanwhile, Jamal opened a notebook and scribbled a few lines that no one could read. He didn't need to respond now, because he knew the banquet they had unwittingly invited him to was nothing more than a masquerade ball. And in just a few minutes, every mask would have to come off. 1 hour after Jamal was relocated, the plane had reached cruising altitude, and the first-class cabin returned to its usual rhythm of champagne flutes and self-satisfied murmurs. But in business class, where Jamal now sat, the silence wasn't one of comfort, it was one of pressure. Everything felt heavier. The sideways glances from the passenger next to him, the drone of the aircraft stretching like a hiss, and the fury within him rising like an electric current on slow burn. The curtain ahead had become a clear symbol of what this airline truly believed, that class is a birthright, not a service one can buy. In that moment, a whisper came unexpectedly to his ear, deep, clear, and deliberate. Last month, they did the exact same thing to a young man, brown-skinned, polite, soft-spoken, Sat next to me for barely 10 minutes before they moved him to economy. No explanation. Jamal turned his head. The man beside him, likely in his 70s, neatly dressed in a light charcoal suit, with eyes sharp as glass, was still staring straight ahead at the safety card in his hands. I asked the flight attendant. She said it was a system error. Funny though, I've never seen that kind of error go the other way. Jamal sat quietly, letting the words soak in. The man continued. No one said a thing. No one asked why. Because no one wants to be the person who makes things uncomfortable. And in this society, comfort always wins over truth. That last sentence settled into Jamal's mind like a blade pressed gently but deeply. He looked over, measuring the man. You used to work with the airline? The man gave a slight nod. I sat on this airline's advisory board. Left 2 years ago. Too much silence, not enough truth. A pause. Then he turned to Jamal, his gaze slow but cutting like steel. I recognize you now. Valmora Capital. I didn't expect to see you sitting back here. Not up front, not... Jamal didn't answer. He simply tilted his mouth into a small curve, half an acknowledgement, half a warning. At that moment, the plane was still soaring high above the Atlantic Ocean, but Jamal was no longer thinking about altitude. He was thinking about systems, about people who make no mistakes but repeat the same wrongs like a scripted routine. And the only thing keeping his composure intact was the certainty that this performance was about to be exposed. Inside the cockpit, the pilot had no idea that a full-blown brand crisis was unfolding by the second behind him. Bryce, the senior flight attendant, walked toward Jamal with a face tight as wire and a smile so thin it looked printed on. Mr. Rivers, he began, in a voice as soft as silk but as cold as steel. We've received a few concerns from passengers, suggesting that your presence may be contributing to tension on this flight. Jamal looked up, his gaze calm but piercing. I'm sitting quietly, writing in a notebook. That constitutes creating tension? Bryce didn't respond directly. We want to ensure safety and comfort for everyone on board, and to do so, we are required to divert to Shannon Airport for further handling. Around them, whispers stirred. A young female passenger sitting nearby quietly lifted her phone, recording the moment without a word. She went live, and one sentence whispered into the feed sent the internet into flames. They're removing a black man from this flight, not for causing trouble, but for sitting in the wrong seat meant for a white man. From a few hundred viewers, the stream surged to thousands, then hundreds of thousands, and reached over 1 million within 30 minutes. Hashtags began flooding every platform. Hashed Jamal Rivers, hashed Flight 332. Shame, hash sky discrimination. When the plane touched down in Ireland, Jamal was escorted off the aircraft by 2 security officers in silence, head held high, posture unshaken. Bryce watched him leave and muttered under his breath, "Better to handle this early before it gets bigger." One of the Irish officers turned back, his eyes sharp as blades. "He's the calmest person on this entire plane, mate." In the cabin, Gavin Locke lifted his champagne glass, smirked and said, "The air in first class feels lighter now. Some people, their presence is the problem." No one laughed, but no one spoke up either. No one in the cabin could have predicted that less than an hour after being forced off the plane, Jamal Rivers would return. Not as a passenger, but as a force. When the cabin door opened, his presence froze the air for a few seconds. Not a hair out of place, not a wrinkle in his suit. His steps steady as before, but this time no longer carrying the silence of endurance, rather the presence of someone who holds the power. Gavin Locke nearly dropped his wine glass when he saw him. "You're back? I thought you'd been removed." Jamal didn't respond immediately. He looked directly at Gavin, then around the cabin, his voice deep but resonant. "You've mistaken silence for weakness." The entire cabin held its breath. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a slim black card, etched in platinum with the emblem of Valmora Capital. No introduction needed. Bryce, who had just overseen the so-called emergency landing, turned pale the moment he recognized the insignia. "Wait. Valmora?" he stammered. "That can't be." Jamal nodded slowly. Valmora Capital acquired 51% of Atlantic Air just 2 days ago. I signed that agreement. And today, you've chosen to humiliate your new owner on your company's flagship flight. No one spoke. Jamal stepped toward the cabin phone console and made a call. His voice dropped, calm yet blade-sharp with precision. "Rivers here. Activate Clause 7C. Suspend the Zurich integration. Freeze all affiliate equity rights. Issue notice to shareholders. Atlantic Air has violated operational and fiduciary ethics." When he hung up, every eye in the cabin turned toward him. Not out of curiosity, but fear. An earthquake had just been triggered, not with a shout, but with a single command. And this time, Jamal did not need to leave the cabin. It was the system itself that would be forced to retreat. Less than 20 minutes after Jamal's phone call, the global financial markets began to tremble. Data streams on trading screens in London, Frankfurt, and New York glowed blood red, signaling an economic storm on the horizon. Atlantic Air stock, once praised for its steady growth, plummeted without breaks, down 6%, then 12%, and in just 8 minutes, it had lost over 27% of its value. Financial news networks cut into regular programming with urgent bulletins. Valmora Capital ends partnership with Atlantic Air following discrimination scandal involving its new chairman. An earthquake had just been triggered, not by protest, not by slogans, but by capital, the only language the financial world cannot ignore. On board the flight, the air thickened with tension. Bryce, the one who had ordered the emergency landing, stood frozen, his face pale as ash. Sasha sat silently in the galley, her hands trembling as her phone flashed a new alert. Company emergency meeting called over media crisis. But the greatest blow landed on Gavin Locke. As the plane touched down in Zurich, 3 men in sleek grey suits, accompanied by 2 airport security officers, entered the cabin. No hesitation, no ceremony. They headed straight for seat 1A, where Gavin was still pretending nothing had happened. The lead officer spoke, his voice calm but resolute. "Mr. Gavin Locke, your VIP privileges with Atlantic Air and all global alliance carriers are hereby revoked. Your travel history will be transferred to the behavioral review system. Please collect your belongings and disembark under supervision." Gavin was stunned. The way he slowly stood, trying to keep his head high while his panic-stricken eyes betrayed him, said everything. No one mocked him. No one offered pity. The passengers who had once remained silent during his insults now looked at him as if witnessing a relic from a bygone era, a world where privilege was once an unspoken rule. Bryce and Sasha did not leave with Gavin. They were asked to remain in the cabin for the internal investigation. No charges were spoken at that moment, but a thin slip of paper printed from a handheld device was placed before them. Suspended from duty, pending investigation for discriminatory conduct, procedural abuse, and willful concealment of violations. By now, no one confused courtesy with submission to true power, and Atlantic Air, once a prestigious airline, was in free fall, not from the skies, but from trust. Not long after the plane landed and the official statement from Valmora was released, social media exploded like a tidal wave. The hashtags Jamal Rivers, Flight 332, Shame, and #Airline. Accountability flooded every platform, from Twitter to TikTok, from investment forums to professional aviation communities. But what no one anticipated was that this story would not end with punishment. It began to grow into something more, a source of inspiration. 3 days after the incident, a handwritten note appeared on the personal Instagram account of Evan, the young flight attendant who had hesitated but had wanted to speak up. The image showed a plain white piece of paper, the handwriting round and simple. I was wrong. I knew it was wrong, but I stayed silent. Because I was afraid of losing my job. Because I thought my silence wouldn't matter. But it turns out, that silence was exactly how I contributed to a broken system. Beneath that letter, Evan announced he would donate his entire first 6-month salary to create a fund called the Crew Equity Fund, a resource for legal and mental health support for minority airline employees who are discriminated against or punished for speaking out. The post went viral, not because it was sensational, but because it was sincere. And while Jamal left no comment and did not share it publicly, just a few hours later, the Valmora Foundation sent Evan a personal email. They were prepared to match his donation tenfold as the seed investment for a broader industry-wide reform initiative. Competing airlines held emergency meetings. Human resource departments across major corporations began re-evaluating their staff training protocols. Former Atlantic Air employees started to quietly share their painful experiences for the first time in years. A retired attorney returned to his office just to write an op-ed for the Financial Times titled "The Day Power Boarded Last." And amid all these aftershocks, Jamal did not hold a press conference, nor did he appear on any news programs. He simply kept working, quietly and steadily, as if using each day to mend the cracks in the very system he had just exposed. 2 weeks after Atlantic Air's freefall in both the market and public opinion, a blurry photo surfaced on Reddit. No title, no caption. In the image, a man wearing faded jeans and a worn jacket is seen carrying a box of food into a community center in Queens. Only by looking closely could one recognize it was Gavin Locke. Many assumed it was a publicity stunt. But in the following days, more images appeared. This time, candid shots taken by other volunteers. Gavin mopping the floors, handing out lunch, sitting quietly while listening to formerly incarcerated individuals share their experiences about reintegration. No TV crews, no slogans. A curious local journalist followed up and confirmed Gavin Locke had voluntarily begun working full-time for a non-profit called Equal Footing, an organization dedicated to racial equity in public spaces. The same organization Jamal had quietly funded for years. In a short letter, Gavin spoke for the first time. I used to believe money defined worth, that power belonged only to those born in the right place. But when everything was stripped away, I didn't feel loss. I saw the truth. I wasn't destroyed. I had just begun to truly live. The letter didn't excuse, didn't deflect, and perhaps most surprisingly, he made no effort to restore his image. He was simply trying to reclaim himself. Meanwhile, Atlantic Air began to change in earnest. The executive board was restructured. Hiring policies were rewritten from the ground up, with independent oversight by minority community groups. Executive compensation was now tied to internal cultural audits. An anonymous feedback line was opened to all employees, from flight attendants to mechanics. A month after the incident, during a quiet ceremony held inside a hangar at Newark, a new award was introduced. The Derek Cole Leadership Citation, named after Jamal's birth name, to honor those who lead not through power, but through integrity. When invited to receive the honorary emblem, he said just one sentence: "Power doesn't lie in what you shout in a crowd, but in what you quietly fix when no one is watching." Then he stepped down. No fanfare, no spotlight. Because for Jamal Rivers, true change doesn't need lights. It needs courage, it needs patience, and it needs someone willing to begin, even when no one else dares to speak. In today's business world, a brand is no longer defined solely by profit margins or market position, but by how it treats people, especially when no one is watching. The story of Jamal Rivers is not just a wake-up call. It is proof that silence is no longer an option. When justice is carried out with calm resolve and strategic action, it has the power to transform an entire industry. If you believe that respect cannot be commodified, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel to follow more stories that reach the core of business ethics, and don't forget to leave a comment with the words "well deserved" to help spread this message.